old Viennese tune that provides the theme for a set of variations in the third movement of the string quartet by Ernest Kanitz, one of the composers featured in Chandos' Music and Exile series. I'm James Jolly and welcome to this Gramophone podcast. The Arc Ensemble have been bringing this often totally forgotten music back to life, and the recent Kanitz album drew from Gramophone's critic Richard Bratby an enthusiastic review, which closed with the hope that there's more Kanitz to come. I was joined by Zoom by the Arc Ensemble's artistic director Simon Wynberg to talk about the musicians and the music that animates this important recording project, and also about their forthcoming visit to London's Wigmore Hall. So before we talk about the music, let's talk about the musicians. Now, Arc Ensemble, that's artists of the Royal Conservatory, and that's based in Toronto. So what took you to Toronto?
My wife took me to Toronto. She's Canadian. But the ensemble was created at the Royal Conservatory, which is really a national institution. It has programs for professional track students at the Glenn Gould School. It has community and educational programs and an exam system for children and amateur musicians, much like the programs in the UK. It's the one institution and it's on a national scale. So the idea behind the Arc Ensemble was to create something that would promote the organization and also promote the players in the ensemble and show off their expertise, which is considerable. And it was my job to find a way of finding a place for the ensemble in the musical world that would draw attention both to the conservatory and obviously to the ensemble itself. And to begin with, my feeling was that if we were to replace or try and redo repertoire that was already in the catalogue, we would be coming up against hundreds of competitive recordings, and it was going to be difficult to make a place for ourselves. So as I have a background in musicology, I thought we should start exploring the unknown. That's essentially what we did from the get-go. And after a few years, we moved into this Exile repertoire, which seemed huge and really underexplored, undeservedly so.
And are the players faculty members at the conservatory?
Yes, they're all senior teachers with teaching and performance careers, much like the academy or the college in London.
I mean, it must be very inspiring to a young player to go into a concert hall and see their teacher grappling with something, really quite complex, actually as a practicing musician.
It is, and what's even more exciting is for them to actually play on the stage with their teachers. We have a concert coming up where we're putting an ensemble together with teachers and their students. And the standard, of course, is so high now that one can do this and create really wonderful programs at a very high level.
And we should just point out that the makeup of the group, it's essentially a string quartet with a piano and a clarinet. So you could do a piano quintet, you could do a clarinet quintet, and you could expand or contract, as necessary.
Absolutely. And we add players to that. The last recording we did, there was a saxophone involved, a double bass player, a guest student violinist. So there's a lot of flexibility within that, but that's our core group.
So far as the repertoire that the Arc Ensemble play, this musical and exile theme, where do you actually go and find the music?
It's really a question of finding the composers and then finding the music. I mean, one needs to find the appropriate people who have some sort of reputation or some sort of history or some sort of praise from their colleagues. And then using that as the starting point, one hunts around for various archives. I've always said that there's no real magic in this. And I think really all one needs is a sort of sense of curiosity. I mean, there's a little bit of genealogical chops that are involved. And I'm fortunate to have a few people around me who are very good at that. But once one has found the archive, then it's really game over. We go through the music, you find out whether it's any good, you give it to the ensemble and they try it out, and then you get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It's a pretty straightforward process, actually. And there's a huge amount of music is still waiting for exploration.
So, in a lot of cases, are you working from manuscripts, original manuscripts, or will parts have been created sort of back in the day when this music was written? Or a mixture, I guess.
It is a mixture. Recently, it's been almost all manuscript. The last recording and the one before, the Canitz recording we did, the Block recording, almost none of his works were published. I think it was one or two. So all his music is preserved in beautifully written, fair copies, almost as if he was saying to us, here they are. I'm off now, but if you can do something with these, do go ahead. They really are beautifully written and very, very legible.
And do the players respond to actually having the composer's handwriting on the stands in front of them?
Yes, I think they do. I mean, not in the same way they would if it was a sort of a Mozart manuscript, for example. I mean, I've heard stories of people playing original Mozart parts and the thrill that gives. But because these are unknown composers, there is that sense of mystery about them. But it does make an impression, yes, absolutely.
Because it is interesting, when you look at a manuscript, and the way it's actually written and laid out, it seems to tell you an awful lot about the composer. I mean, when I was in Vienna the other day, I was at the Schoenberg Center, and I was looking at some Schoenberg scores, and they are incredibly neat. I mean,
Yes.
you wouldn't need them printed. You could read them absolutely,
Yeah.
perfectly. It was extraordinary. And actually, and then you thought it through, and you thought, actually, in many ways, I'm not the slightest bit surprised. Same with
Yes.
Stravinsky, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. There's a kind of clarity to scores which tell you about how they thought and how fussy they were actually in many cases, that they wanted this in such and such a way with such and such a dynamic and such a slur. So all these things are really important. Well, I mean, one of the things that does happen though is that if there is something out of place, a huge discussion will start, about a pitch or a slur or an expression mark, or there are any number of things which start conversations, and then you have to sort of get to the bottom of it. And because these are works that are being played for the first time, there's a feeling that you do want to get things absolutely right. So there's this kind of added responsibility. And in a way, there's sort of less freedom about making your own sort of decision. When the decisions that have already been made, you can kind of run against the grain. But if they are yet to be made, then you want to keep it as close to the composer's wishes as possible.
And do you find your audiences, and I guess at one remove, listeners to the CDs, do they react almost as they are at a premiere? Because, this is music that, if it's been heard at all, was a very long time ago.
Yes.
But as you say, often this is perhaps the first time it's ever been performed.
Yes, I mean, I think our audience in Toronto, the ones that attend our concerts regularly, they have this sense of inquiry that they want to discover something new. Personally, I think we have a bit of a problem with the overexposure of the canon. I mean, I think we're at its mercy, and this was kind of brought home to me when we began to involve students in our concerts and in readings, and I would get a quartet together of students. So I would say, well, here are the parts. Tell me when you've organized a session. I'll come and give it a listen. And they would say, well, is there a recording of it? I would say, no, that's the point. Is there's no recording. You have to work it out and decide for yourself. Oh, I'm old enough to remember getting pieces and having to work out what the hell was going on because there weren't recordings that were instantly available. You might be able to find a recording, but you'd have to go and you'd have to go to a record store and you'd have to buy it. And I mean, it was a process. And now it is so easy. that having no recording throws up all sorts of questions. Why, why isn't there a recording? Well, you're about to make the first recording, so you have to come to grips with them. And this exploration of the unknown is something that really has been lost to me, it seems, because we have this tyranny of the canon, and the tyranny, I hate to say this to someone who's so involved in gramophone, but the tyranny of the recorded sound.
It probably also forces originality because, you know, if you go off and listen to the CD, you're probably more easily swayed by the choice of tempo of whoever
Right.
was on the record. But actually, if all you've got is black dots on a white page, you have to come to these decisions. Well, actually, is that, you know, what is the ideal speed, you know, all that sort of stuff, which is actually really fundamental to what making music is all about. So it's probably very, very good. I mean, particularly for students to do that.
Yeah, it's an incredibly valuable exercise, I think, because once you start deciding for yourself basic things like phrasing, articulation, tempi, the whole sound world, the atmosphere that the composer wants, once you start to think about that, you transport that to works that you are already familiar with. You start to become a little more analytical, I think.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about the last release, the Ernest Canitz album, which I must say I'd never heard of Canitz. Although, funnily enough, when I was in the Exile Centrum's sort of show space in Vienna this week, there was a picture of him and there was stuff about him. So I sort of felt, you know, all these different sort of things that I'm thinking about at the moment had come together. But I think what was fascinating about this record is it traces quite a long period of his life. So sort of before he left, right
Yes.
through, you know, his various places in America, right through to sort of the 1950s. I mean, how did you stumble across him?
I'd come across his name because for a long while, he was quite influential at USC, University of Southern California, where he taught, and he was a close friend and confidant of Ernst Toch. So his name wasn't unknown to me, but I had very little idea of his music. There are a few things online. There's a bassoon concerto, which is really quite good, and some odds and ends. But most of the work, I think all the works, apart from, I think the violin sonata was released, but on a very small label, and it's very, very difficult to find. But apart from that, none of the works had ever been recorded. So, I mean, it was fun to put this thing together because one could trace the evolution of his style from this rather Straussian original, but definitely based in a sort of late romantic tradition, and how that evolved to something very different. And the influence, I mean, the saxophone piece, for example, the three saxophone pieces, it's very difficult to believe that it's the same composer.
Yes, I must say, listening to the violin sonata, I felt there was a little bit of French influences
Yes.
in there as well. You know, I could sort of relate it to, you know, some of the early 20th century French composers, sort of the
Yeah,
Ravel cycle.
there's a bit of César Franck there too, I think. What I found extraordinary about Cannat's is that, unlike so many emigres, he embraced that kind of American can-do spirit. He enjoyed America. He adored Los Angeles, and was stimulated by being in a young country that had this enthusiasm in its younger folk. I suppose the younger generation was a lot different from the younger generation that he would have encountered in conservatories in Europe. But he had a huge capacity for work and for withstanding an unbelievable series of horrors that life threw at him. I mean, he lost his father when he was very young. His mother committed suicide. Then his sister killed herself a few years later. Then they were forced, he and his kids and his wife were forced to leave Vienna, and he spent 6 years in South Carolina, and 3 of them were in a little town called Due West, which is miles from anywhere, and it has about, maybe to this day, I think there are fewer than 1,000 people there. And he taught at a small college there, and unbelievably hot in the summer, and the level of the students would have been so totally different from the expertise that he would have experienced with his Viennese students. I mean, it's difficult to imagine how you would acclimatize to that, but he did, and he found it a really rewarding experience. He found everything rewarding, it seems, coming from a sophisticated metropolitan cultural environment, and then working in this parochial, highly religious, probably rather racist environment in an agricultural community rather than a metropolitan one. I mean, he embraced the challenge, and there's not a whisper of angst or the feeling that he'd been hard done by. And then when he went to Los Angeles, everything opened up, and he loved the sea and he loved the sun, and he thought it was the best city in the world.
Presumably, there were quite a lot of fellow emigres when he arrived in Los Angeles that he could, if he
Yes,
didn't reconnect, he would connect with, I guess.
yes, absolutely. Well, he became very friendly with Toch, who had preceded him at the job at USC. He filled Toch's place. And he actually had a fairly solid career compared to many of his colleagues. There were a host of major conductors who conducted his works. But of course, after he died, he really fell off the map almost instantly. I mean, within a couple of years, he'd been forgotten. No one was playing his works. It's an extraordinary story. I mean, it's very inspiring, especially compared to many of his colleagues who, I mean, Schoenberg, for example, who just thought he'd been hard done by and people didn't appreciate him, and so many of them who thought of America as being really subpar when it came to intellectual stimulation and cultural sophistication.
I must say, I enjoyed the recording enormously. I had no idea what to expect, and I mean, I love the string quartet, which is a kind of a very varied piece. Actually, you travel quite a long way within its four movements, and but when it
Absolutely.
starts, you think, oh, this is going to be tough. Actually, not a bit of it. It's a really
Yeah.
delightful piece.
Yes,
Yeah.
and people have loved playing that. And the first performance of that was given by a string quartet at the conservatory, a group of young kids who they did have some coaching with it from Stephen Dan, our violist, but they essentially put the thing together themselves, and they did a great job on it. And that was a kind of trial run, and I thought, well, it's really good piece. We the ensemble should record it. But it was thanks to these kids that we heard the first performance.
Because the series is sort of, if you look at the Chandos catalogue, but the series is actually longer than that because you started on another label and then it came. Is that right?
That's right. Well, we're on number 9 now. Canets was the 9th release with Chandos. Now, I'd made several recordings for Chandos as a guitarist in the 80s, and that was with Brian Cousins, who had started the label in, I suppose, the late 70s. So we made 3 recordings for Sony, which went out on the Red Seal label, which was a great thrill, but it was short lived. In the late 2000s, I think there was a shakeup at Sony, and their head of A&R was replaced, and ARC was parked, as it were. And I mean, it's amazing how big companies can change their artistic allegiances, quicker than they change their socks. It's just extraordinary. Someone leaves, and things that you thought were going to continue, but they just fall apart. So I met with Ralph, who I hadn't seen, for decades. Ralph being Brian's son, and he spoke the words that one always wants to hear. He said, I don't want to do a one-off. I'd like to do a series. And I thought, oh, right, and I like this man. And that's how it started.
It's a really wonderful thing. I mean, I think so many of these projects probably go back to that, the Decca series that Michael Haas introduced, the Entrata to Musik, and that kind of started this movement going. But I love the focus of this series on chamber music and, names you've never heard. You just think, oh, I'll give this a try. And then you just think, wow, this is an extraordinary musical voice. And often, an extraordinary story behind the musical voice.
I think the extraordinary stories have been incredibly helpful because in promoting these releases, I mean, typically one is either focused on the performer and what the performer is doing with the work or the work itself. And if the work is part of the repertoire, there is not a whole lot you could really say about it if it's a canonical work. Whereas these composers all, almost without exception, have some sort of extraordinary story because it involved them leaving somewhere in Europe, whether it was Austria or Germany or the Sudetenland or wherever it was, France. They all had some kind of decision to make about leaving, and then they had this task of settling into a new country, and that in itself provides a real story that PR people can hang their hat on.
And we should talk. This is not just a series of recordings because you tour as well, and you're coming to the UK quite soon. So tell us that you're sort of in residence at the Wigmore Hall for the whole of one Sunday, which looks a very
Yes.
exciting series.
Yeah, there are three concerts that we have on Sunday, the 1st of February. There's a morning concert, an afternoon, and then a larger evening show. The morning concert is devoted to one of my favorite finds, Walter Kaufmann, who left Prague and spent 12 years in India and adopted a lot of the Indian influences into his music. So the end result is a mix of his traditional training and the kind of raga themes that he found in India. I mean, he became a real expert on Indian music and wrote large books about North and South Indian music, and just an extraordinary brain. And the music is really compelling and interesting and accessible. So there are three works in the morning program, all by Kaufman. The afternoon is devoted to Eastern Mediterranean theme, works by a composer called Alberto Hemsi, who grew up in Turkey. His parents were originally from Livorno in Italy. And I suppose back in the midst of time, they'd come in from Spain. But Hemsi devoted his life to exploring Sephardic melodies and the Jewish diaspora and the themes that had been sung, particularly by women, as part of the Jewish vocal tradition. And he also wrote some chamber music, which has been completely forgotten. And there's orchestral stuff as well, which I wish somebody would take a look at. So we're doing some works by Alberto Hemsi, and then the wonderful clarinet quintet by Paul Ben Haim, a really super piece. I'm surprised it's not played more often, but it's a lovely work. Obviously influenced by the two big clarinet quintets, the Brahms and the Mozart. It's a lovely work. And then in the evening, it's a kind of potpourri of various works by Jerzy Fittelberg and Frederick Bloch, who was on our previous record to the Kametz recording, Robert Müller-Hartmann, and the last piece is a piano quintet by Szymon Laks, which is a really wonderful, fun work based on popular Polish melodies.
Well, thank you so much for your time and introducing us to the Arc Ensemble.
Thank you, James. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I'm a regular listener to the Gramophone podcast, and I really enjoy it. So it's quite an honor to be included in it.
The opening of Szymon Laks's piano quintet. It was played by Arc Ensemble on their fine Chandos recording in the Music in Exile series. Our guest this week was the Arc Ensemble's artistic director, Simon Wynberg, and their Music in Exile day at Wigmore Hall is Sunday, February the 1st, with concerts at 11:30, 3 and 7:30, with an evening pre-concert talk by Michael Haas at 6 p.m. That concert also features the string quartet by Ernest Kanitz, the focus of the ensemble's most recent Chandos release. Full details at wigmore-hall.org.uk. Gramophone podcasts are free, so if you enjoy them, then a really great way to support our work is to take out a subscription to Gramophone magazine. Over 13 issues a year, we bring you hundreds of reviews by our expert critics, as well as in-depth articles about the latest classical music releases and the most exciting musicians of the day. And if you head over to gramophone.co.uk/subscribe and enter the code podcast20 in the checkout, you can even get a 20% discount off any subscription package. We really value your support. And consider leaving a review or rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And do look out for another Gramophone podcast very soon.